Hope that's better. Yeah. I'm not getting any reaction from anyone, so I'm not sure whether you can hear me at all. Nilma, can you let me know whether you can hear me okay or not? Oh, you can hear me fine. Oh, perfect. Maybe it was just that person who was struggling to hear me. Well, welcome. So nice to have you here. Some of you have come to these sessions before. It may be your first time at one of my sessions. If it is your first time, welcome. I'm glad you found us. We do these sessions every week on a Wednesday. They're all different topics around divorce. And really, they're geared to give you knowledge, to get you to ask questions, to give you some clarity. The sessions are about 45 minutes, and I'll talk for a little bit, and then I'll invite you to drop your questions to me in the chat box, and I'll answer them as many as I can at the end. So if you've got questions, put them in the chat box. You can drop them to me privately if you don't want to share in the Zoom live exactly what you are asking. So feel free to, interact with me in the chat box because can be quite lonely when you're presenting this just to a screen and you don't get any interaction. So I would love it if you would interact, if you would put your questions, what's coming up for you in the chat box. So a little bit about me before we start. If this is your first session, you may not have come across me before. My name is Bhavna Radia. I am a former divorce lawyer and mediator, and I now help people to get divorced in a way that is low cost, because I know that can be a worry for so many people, but also in a way that is more holistic. So I'll tell you a bit more about how I work at the end, but to know who I am is really important. So I am a single mum of three girls. I found myself going through a divorce 13 years ago when I made the decision to leave my marriage. It was a really difficult decision to make, and I'm sure some of you will understand this if you have made this decision already. It's a really tough thing to do, to make that decision when you've been married for 15 years and you've got three children together. But sometimes it is a necessity to step away and to change the course of your life. During this time, my mental health really suffered because although it was a decision I made, it was something I felt I didn't have a choice but to do. And I really struggled with how I was feeling, and also the children's mental health really suffered as well. So we had quite a journey to getting to the end of that divorce. Luckily for me, I was a practicing lawyer, so I know exactly what I was doing, and I was able to have no legal fees through my divorce. And I know that my ex-husband didn't as well. But that got me thinking, when I got to the other side of my divorce, it got me thinking, what about all those people that don't have the money, just like I wouldn't have had any money to pay for lawyers, but actually are struggling to get help? And that's why I set up my business, to help in a different way. But also, that's why I set up these sessions, to bring you some guidance and knowledge, and a space to ask questions as well. So that's enough about me. Let's get started. As I mentioned, we're talking about the family home today, and I'll share a little bit about the situation around the family home. But feel free to ask me questions so that I can directly answer the things that you need help with. So let me just get started with that. Okay, I hope you can see that okay. Looks fine for me. Okay, this is probably one of the biggest questions that people have. And, I was on Facebook this morning, had been tagged, and that was one of the questions. I'm going through a difficult time, decided to get divorced. don't know what to do with the family home, or maybe we need to sell it. And it's really difficult to know the right answer on this straight away. It's usually the biggest asset that a couple have, but not necessarily. Sometimes pensions can be worth more, but usually this is the biggest asset. And also, it's the one that holds the most emotions. It gives you security, it gives you stability. And people would say, but it's just bricks and mortar. And it doesn't feel like that, does it? When you're going through a divorce and you realize that potentially you might have to move out of your family home, that does feel quite hard. And so, although people say it's just bricks and mortar, that isn't how it felt to me. And I wonder if that's how it feels to you. It'd be great to find out how you are feeling about the family home, just because then it gives me an idea of the things that you're struggling with. For me, it gave me stability. It definitely gave me security. It's where my children were used to living. We had memories there, and I just couldn't think of moving at that time. The thought of my family home being sold was really hard for me to deal with. And so I held on tight, saying, I'll keep the family home. I want to live here. I'm doing most of the childcare, so I'll live here. And so that was my viewpoint until I realized that actually financially it just wasn't viable for me to live there. I was thinking I'll work 60 hours a week, I'll get a second job. But bringing up three children and my youngest was one at the time, it really wasn't the right thing to do. But emotionally, I was so connected to the family home, I couldn't see anything else. And I don't know if that's coming up for any of you, but it may be what you're thinking of as well. So, what happens to the family home? You might be feeling emotional. You may have your own thoughts about what you want to do with the family home. But, who stays in this family home until things are decided? Because we've got various different steps to take when we're looking at the home. The first thing is who lives there temporarily while you're agreeing things, while you're thinking about what happens to the family home, maybe what happens to all the other assets. You're making plans for the children. Potentially your divorce has started. What happens in the interim? And this is a question I get asked quite a bit. And, potentially that's a question that you've got as well. So, you might be thinking, I want to stay here, at least in the short term, but how do you decide this? So it might be that the family home is in joint names. It might be in one person's name, either your name or the other person's name. And whoever's name it's in, you both still have the right to live or stay there, at least temporarily, until you've reached an agreement on what you're going to do permanently. If you get asked to leave, you need to make sure you get proper guidance and help around this before you move out. There may be some consequences depending on, the situation that you're in. So always make sure you speak to somebody before you take that step. Also, sometimes when you have left voluntarily, it might be hard to get back in. So you might think, I'll move out for a month and then we'll see how it goes. Or I'll move out for 3 months and then, depending on how it goes, I might move back in. It might be difficult for you to move back in at that stage. Sometimes it's also difficult to get your belongings if you don't leave with them. So sometimes you'll think, well, I'm back. I'll be back in a month, so I'll just take a few things and I'll come back. If you're not able to enter the house again, your things may be left in the house, and sometimes that can cause arguments. So it might be that you need to think these things through before making that decision to leave. It might be that you've asked your partner to leave. And what's the situation with that? Because maybe they're refusing to go. It might be hard for you to force them to leave, because if you've both got rights to stay there and you say, can you please leave? While we're going through this divorce, it would be easier and better for us if we're not living in the same house, because it can lead to a lot of tension, can't it? When you're both living in the house and going through a divorce. Maybe there's already been tension and now it's going to get worse potentially. So it might be that you need them to move out. You might say, well, I'm the main carer for the children. It's better if they remain here until we make decisions. So actually you move out because I'll need to be dropping the children to school and there's no point moving them. But it is hard to force them to leave if they are refusing. Sometimes couples will live together until they've reached this sort of agreement on what they're doing with all their finances, and they've been through some of the legalities as well. And then potentially you'll either put the house on the market and both of you move out once it's sold, or you might be putting the house in one person's name, and once that's done, the other person leaves. But if that's not the case, you might think, well, I need you to go. I can't live here while you are still here. And there is difficulties with forcing somebody out. Some people will call the police if there's arguments, if there's aggression or threats. And obviously that is open to you if you're in an unsafe situation. You might go to court to get an occupation order. And that is an order that says that you can stay in the family home and the other person has to leave. But these steps are quite big. If you call the police, obviously that's quite a big thing. You might not feel comfortable doing that because the children live at home. Maybe you don't want to cause any hostility. Maybe you're thinking, if I call the police, this is just going to get worse. And so you might not want to take that step. If you are unsafe, if there is domestic abuse and you feel scared, then you have to take that step. That's the way of getting some protection. Also, an occupation order is a pretty serious order to get. When you've both got rights to live in the family home, the courts don't easily make an order that one person has to leave because they recognize that both of you have a right to stay there. And unless there is a big reason why that person should be forced to leave, they don't easily make that order. But of course, if there's been threats, if there's been domestic abuse, it may be that you need an occupation order to for the courts to let that person know that you live there and they can't come back in. And it can be a temporary measure until matters are decided properly. But going forward, you really need to think about the longer term as well. So how do we do that? Let's talk about that. And I can see there's some questions in the chat box, and I'll come back to those at the end. So assuming that you own the family home, how do you work out what happens to it? So the way the legal process works in the UK is we have to look at all assets, all your finances, when we're working out what happens to each thing, including the family home. So ideally, what we would be doing is this process of financial disclosure. And financial disclosure is when you are both transparent about what you have in your name, what the other person has in their name, what you have in joint names, and what if they jointly own property with another person, for example, you have to declare and value everything that you have in this country and abroad so that we know what there is to share. That's a process called financial disclosure. And I talked about it last week, I believe. So there is a talk on that. Once you know what there is, then we have to look at what's the fairest way of sharing what there is. And that includes the family home. There's lots of factors that are taken into account when we're looking at fairness, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But when we're looking at the family home, we are looking at your housing needs. So what housing needs do you both have and the children have? So when we assess your housing needs is what type of house do you need to live in? What size? Where does the house need to be? And what's the best way of you getting that housing? So these are the different things that we have to look at. There's no simple answer, unfortunately. I wish there was, but we have to look at all the circumstances, all the assets that are there, your income, your expenditure, to get an idea of what should happen with all the assets, but also, more importantly, for today's talk, what happens with the family home. Ideally, you'd come to an agreement about what happens to the family home and all your assets. But if you can't, then you would need to take other steps to reach an agreement. So it may be with family or friends, it may be mediation, it may be negotiation through solicitors, it may be other forms of out of court dispute resolution. And there are plenty available. If you still can't get to an agreement because all of these forms are voluntary, you may have to go to court to decide what happens to all your assets. But the factors you need to think about when you're looking at your assets and the family home is, are there any children under 18? And what are their needs? Where are they going to be living? Who's their main carer, etc. Both of your ages, because if one person's retired and the other one isn't, then maybe that's relevant. But age can be a relevant factor. How long the marriage has been going on, the value of the assets before, during, and after the marriage as well. Even different things like earning capacity. What income have you got? Both of you have. What future earning capacity do you have? So, for example, what mortgage capacity do you have? So that we can work out what you will do from a housing point of view. What both of you have contributed to the marriage. And this is a really important one because so many people say to me, well, I've paid the mortgage for 10 years, so therefore I should have a greater share of the family home. And it doesn't work that way because the other person may have contributed by looking after the family, bringing up the children, potentially taking the stress off the person that's working. So, or they may be working part-time and they've used their income for other things while you've paid the mortgage. So we do need to look at both parties' contributions, but it's not necessarily financial. We look at the standard of living that you've enjoyed during your marriage, whether you have any health needs, so physical health needs, mental health needs, whether your children have any physical or mental health needs. So anything like that. And generally, the housing needs, pension needs, capital needs that you all have. So we look at all of this and we try and develop proposals, including what happens to the family home. So this is what the courts would look at. This is what I would look at when I was assessing the first question, which is, where is everyone going to live? So coming back to it, what do you expect to happen to your family home? Well, there's a few different options, and I've mentioned a few already. So the first one we generally look at is, can the house be transferred into one party's name and the other person could get something else instead? The reason why we look at that first, it's obviously a quicker option because transferring a house is easier than selling the house. When you transfer the house, there's less cost. When you sell the property, obviously you've got costs of sale, which can be expensive. And if you're both buying properties, then you've got the cost of buying it as an addition. If it is that the house is transferred into one person's name, that can save your costs, and then it might be just one person that needs to buy. Obviously, the children have stability if you transfer the house into one person's name because that's their family home. And maybe they feel comfortable because they know their family home hasn't gone and it's something that they know. So it can be a good option. The courts quite like that option. It's a starting point to see if it's possible. If there's a mortgage on the family home, then that person needs to be able to take over that mortgage. And depending on what the other person's getting, you might need to raise a bigger mortgage to be able to give that other person a lump sum so they could buy as well. Ultimately, we have to look at everyone's housing needs, not just one person. So if you are going to keep the family home, can you get a mortgage for however much is on the family home now? If the other person needs to buy a family home, how will they do that? How will they raise the money, the stamp duty, the costs of buying? Will you give them a lump sum? Are there other assets that they would take instead? Lots of people say, well, they've got a bigger pension, so what I'll do is I'll keep the family home and they'll keep their pension. And that can be an option, but you do need to consider, if you're keeping the family home, What will you do on retirement if you don't have a good pension? Lots of people get really stuck when they take the family home like that, and then they haven't thought about longer term. And then during retirement, they really struggle financially. So just something to bear in mind. One option is selling the house, and I've mentioned that already. And then what you need to do if you're selling the house is make a plan for how will the mortgage get paid until the house is sold? How will the utilities get paid until the house is sold? And what happens on sale? How will you split the proceeds? It's not always 50-50 that's fair. And I do a talk on what's fair as well, so feel free to come along to that in the future. It's not always 50-50. So if one person is earning a good sum of money because they've worked during the marriage, maybe their career is going well and they're earning well, they would have a greater mortgage capacity. The other person may have given up their job to bring up the family or worked part-time. Maybe their earning capacity is massively reduced now, so they can't get a good mortgage. And it might be that they need a greater share to be able to purchase a home or be able to rent a home even. So it's not always a 50-50 share of the proceeds. It may be different depending on other assets and depending on circumstances. So what's the benefit of selling the family home? Well, if the house might be too big, maybe, when you were together, it was, fine to have a house that size with two incomes. Possibly it was affordable. Might be that it's not affordable. It's too big. Maybe you don't want a large mortgage. Maybe you're happy to downsize and have a smaller mortgage or no mortgage at all. It might be that the children are older and you don't need that size house anymore. So it could be quite a good option for some people to sell the family home and buy their own. Maybe if your children are older and you want to move out of the area, you want to live closer to family or friends, maybe that's an opportunity for you to do so. It gives you a clean break when you sell the family home and you both buy your own properties, but actually transferring the family home can also give you a clean break. So both of those options are good. It might be that you want to rent going forward, so you'd rather sell and rent a property. So there are lots of benefits of selling the family home. There are disadvantages as well, of course, and I mentioned one of those, that you will have costs of selling and you will have costs of buying, possibly times two. If you've got children under 18, they might find it quite difficult when you are selling your home and buying another property because they're already going through quite a lot with their parents divorcing and then having contact arrangements potentially, and then they're also having to move out of their family home. So there's quite a lot of different transitions for them. So it can be quite difficult, but sometimes there's no other option. And so it has to happen. So that can be a disadvantage. And obviously I mentioned costs as well. Sometimes you might find that actually none of these are an option. And why would selling the house and transferring the house not be an option? Well, firstly, it might be that the person who, say, for example, is working part-time because they take greater responsibility over the children, potentially that person can't put the family home into their name because they can't get the mortgage in their name that's big enough. The bank won't allow it, for example. Excuse me. Potentially, if the family home is sold and they get a certain amount of money, it's still not enough for them to be able to buy their own property. And so it might be that it's just not, there's no good options there. Maybe the equity in the house is not sufficient for that person to be able to buy anything. So what can you do in that situation? There are other options available. And it's something called a measure order. And some of you will have heard of a measure order. But basically what a measure order is keeping the house in joint names until your youngest child is 18. And then at that point, the house could either be transferred into the name of the person who's been living there, or it is sold and the proceeds split. Usually, say for example, you've got a 10-year-old child, the youngest is 10. When that child is 18, the person living in the house would say, okay, I can transfer this into my name and I will transfer it and I'll give you a lump sum instead. Or I can't afford to transfer it into my name, so let's sell the property and we'll share the proceeds. So usually one person stays in the family home, the other person will move out. The person staying will pay the mortgage usually, and all the bills associated with that house, even though it's in joint names and you've got joint mortgage. It might be that you have a condition where the other person contributes towards the mortgage, but usually it's the person living there that pays the mortgage. And then when that child is 18, usually you transfer the house into your name and you give the other person 50% of the value, the equity in the property. That's usually the share, not always, but usually. So you could think about that. You think, okay, I can transfer it into my name. I've been paying this mortgage for 8 years. I've managed to get the mortgage down. So actually I can now transfer it into my name and raise enough money to give the other person 50% of the equity at that date. If you can't do that, then the house is sold and usually you share the proceeds 50-50. It might be that you have a slightly different percentage, but that's the usual option. So that's called a Mesha order. And it sounds a bit messy, but it can give you benefits if your children are young and there's not enough equity in the property to make it worthwhile selling, or it's not possible to transfer, and you want to make sure the children are stable and have got somewhere stable to live. So that could be a really good option. So there's lots of benefits in a Mesha order. The problem with a Mesha order is that it doesn't give you a clean break. So if your youngest child is 2, then this situation will be going on where you've got your name on that mortgage, even though you don't live there, for 16 years. So it can be a long time that your name is on that property. It might mean that if you're the person that's living away from the family home, that you can't afford to buy in all those years because you just don't have sufficient funds to purchase. So maybe you're renting for 16 years, which isn't maybe ideal for you, but what you do know is that your 50% interest or whatever interest you've got in the family home is going up. And so when you get your lump sum either from sale or when it's transferred, that lump sum will be bigger than it would have been. So at least you're getting some benefit in keeping your name on that family home. So it can be a benefit, but the courts try not to use this as an option because it keeps you joined together financially. It means that if that person defaults on the mortgage, it will affect the other person's credit file. Every time your mortgage comes up for renewal, you need to discuss it and find a good option, and then obviously both sign the mortgage papers to renew your mortgage. So it keeps you linked financially, which isn't ideal. It's not a clean break. So it can be an option, but it's not the first option we look at potentially. Also, over the years, you may not be able to communicate well for whatever reason, and then you still need to discuss this mortgage, and maybe it's just not an easy conversation at that point. So those are the disadvantages of a Mesha order, but it is a possibility. So these are the options you've got with the family home. What you need to do is try and reach an agreement to decide what happens, and hopefully you'll be able to do that. If you can't reach an agreement yourselves or using other out-of-court dispute resolution methods, then you would need to consider court proceedings. And this isn't obviously easy, it's stressful, it's costly, and lots of people, I see so many people say, well, only lawyers win from court proceedings. And I absolutely agree with you that the lawyers will win from that. So you really don't want to go there if you can help it. I was talking to a client yesterday that I work with one-to-one, and he was saying to me about the family home. And when we started working together, we were hoping to get to an agreement with his wife, ex-wife. and she was being pretty unreasonable about disclosure, didn't want to provide information, then didn't want to go to mediation, even though they live in the same house and they're able to talk. She didn't want to do mediation. She went straight to court. And now, many years on through the court proceedings, she's decided to accept the first offer he gave her when they first made this decision to divorce. And through this, obviously, there's been costs incurred. And we're talking about a final hearing now. And luckily, my client has been representing himself because I've been teaching him how to. So he's kept his costs really low, but her costs have been high. They're now coming to final hearing, and she's got a cost estimate of 25,000. She doesn't want to pay that, so she's gone back to what he'd originally offered. And you think the only people that would have won through this is the people that, benefit from a couple going through a fight like this. And it isn't in anybody's interest for that to happen. But of course, that option is available if you really can't get to an agreement. But the important thing that I want to end on now, because I know we're running out of time, is that you can't look at the family home in isolation. When you are considering what you are doing around the family home, you have to look at it as part of a bigger picture. We've got to look through all of the assets and make a plan that works for everything and works for both of you. You can't just look at one person because we've got to consider where the other person will live. This is only part of your settlement. Yes, it's a big part because usually it's the biggest asset and quite an emotive asset as well. So you do need to concentrate on the family home, but look at it as part of a bigger picture. When you're thinking about where you're going to live, how much money will you have every month to spend? Is it going to leave you into debt every month if you take over the family home? You've got to look at what happens to you on retirement. Did you forego a pension to keep the family home and then you're struggling? So we have to plan kind of what happens in the short term, medium term, and long term to decide the best option. So I hope this session has been useful for you. I would love to know your thoughts now that I finish sharing what I wanted to share. I'll tell you a little bit about how I work while you're letting me know your thoughts and putting your questions down. And I can see there is already some questions there. So let me tell you a little bit about my fixed fee. So I work in different ways. I have different services. One is working with me one-to-one on an hourly rate as and when you need it. The other option is this option, which is a fixed fee 6-month support program. And it's designed to help you as an individual move through your divorce. So you get my help, my support, my eyes on everything that's going on for you and guiding you. So these sessions are great, but they're general. I can't give you information and help on your situation and how to move forward. But obviously, when you work with me, I can actually get really involved in your situation and guide you through so that you save money, and you're taking a sensible approach, always trying to keep things amicable. So trying to get to an agreement. If that isn't possible, I can guide you through court proceedings as well. But also keeping your costs down because court proceedings can lead to tens of thousands of pounds, £50,000 worth of fees, for example, which you really don't want in this situation. So I help you with correspondence, documents, the divorce, the finances, financial disclosure, the proposals, negotiation, all of these things. And I bring other experts to come and talk to you as well, so that you're not just getting legal help, you're getting financial, emotional help as well. And we're talking through everything. So feel free to reach out to me if you think something like that might work for you. We can have a call and see if it's the right package for you, because I know that it keeps your fees fixed. If that doesn't work for you, we can work on an hourly rate. So that's always possible as well. And we work as and when you need it with a view that we're keeping your costs down always. So I'm guiding you on some things that you can do yourself. Okay, so if you think that might work, feel free to reach out and book a call. Nelma will be putting the call links in the chat box so you can do that. I also have a book, and this book is all about you planning what you need to do around the divorce and actually taking action. There's worksheets for you to complete. You can download the worksheets so you don't have to complete them in the book, all around the divorce, finances, even things like emotional health, planning arrangements for children as well, and how to complete everything. So feel free to purchase that. That's on Amazon. And Nelma's put a link there. Perfect. Thank you, Nelma. And there's different ways that you can get in touch with me. And what I have forgotten to put here is my YouTube channel. So I'm sharing more and more on YouTube. If you subscribe, you'll always get the up-to-date information, sharing interviews, knowledge, these talks as well. So feel free to subscribe there, and you'll be able to stay up to date with everything that I'm sharing. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now and I will come to your questions. So let's see what you've been asking. I hope you found that useful. It's always good to know whether that was helpful for you. Okay, so I've got a question. If I was willing to forfeit my share of the family home, and given my partner is in a very stable, fairly good, stable job, and I, as the partner, wanting to initiate the divorce, do you think it makes that journey of divorce a lot more simpler? Okay. There shouldn't be a link to who starts the divorce and who keeps the family home. Those two things aren't really linked. Just because you started it, it doesn't mean that you should get less financially. It doesn't mean that you're saying the other person was at fault. It doesn't mean that you should feel guilty. Lots of people, when they start a divorce or make that decision themselves, and the other person really doesn't want the divorce, that there's a lot of guilt involved. And so therefore they'll take a lower settlement. And really, just because you've started it, it doesn't mean you should feel guilty. And you should take less financially either. The other question here is, does it make it easier to have an amicable divorce, or does it make it simpler to go through the divorce rather than court proceedings? That's what I think you're also asking. And of course, yes, if they would like to keep the family home and you agree to that, then it can make it simpler. But we do have to consider your position as well. Is it right for you to move out? Depending on the circumstances, it might be that the first proposal could be that you remain in the family home. But we have to assess all of the options, see which one looks fair, see which one both parties want, because something that looks fair might still not be your priority. You might not want to keep the family home, and the other person might desperately want to keep the family home. And despite, what everybody will tell you, if that's your priority, maybe that's where you should be starting. And then you look at the rest of the assets to make sure that you get a fair share of all the assets as well. So you don't want to forfeit your share of the family home. What you are doing is possibly transferring your share into that person's name and taking something else instead, so that the whole settlement looks fair. And yes, if both of you have an idea of what you would like and that person really wants to keep the family home and you're either not that worried about keeping it, or you'd like to keep it, but you're happy to give it up as well, then maybe that could be an option, but don't forfeit what is fair. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, I kind of went round the houses on that one. I'm finding it hard to figure out whether I should keep the family home for the kids or just sell it and start afresh. How do you even make that kind of decision? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it's not necessarily legal what you're asking. So I'll share a little bit about my story, which I think I already told you that when I was going through this, I had this absolute decision that I was going to stay in the family home. And it was where my children had lived. It was where their school was nearby. My neighbors were my friends. Because the children had gone to school in the area, I knew so many people around there that I really wanted to desperately stay there. And I didn't want to cause that emotional turmoil for my children as well. But as I went through the divorce, I came to the realization financially it was going to be really difficult. And I probably could have got myself into debt trying to keep the family home because sometimes things happen that you don't expect, like maintenance or the roof leaks or something. And if you don't have enough contingency funds or savings, you're going to get yourself into difficulty. And I really needed to be careful, even though I was emotional about it. So I started looking at potentially renting the family home and moving elsewhere, but transferring it into my name, or selling it and moving elsewhere. And I made the decision to sell because actually, by selling the family home and with the share that I was getting, I could be mortgage free. And so I purchased a property mortgage free, which gave me the freedom to settle my children, not worry about the finances so much, really concentrate on them being priority, find my feet and set up my business. I actually went into practice again for a while, and then I was able to set up my business, and it gave me the flexibility to not have the stress. But emotionally, I struggled with that thought of giving up my family home. But I did very quickly realize that actually buying my own property gave me such a good fresh start that I was glad I took that step. But I think it's quite a personal decision. And what you might do is that you keep the family home in the short term if it is affordable for you. And then you make the decision a bit later on. It might be in 3, 4 years' time. You decide that actually we want to move. And then you move at that stage. Obviously, you will have the added expense of transferring the house into your name. If you've got a mortgage, it's obviously you need a solicitor to help you do that. So there is that expense initially. And then later on in 3 years, you might make the decision, we want a fresh start. I'd like to move to this area, and then you could move. So that could be an option. I made it into a home for my children. They were born there and they think of it as home. My parents and siblings are quite close by, so I have a close support network around me. He is the only one named on the property, no mortgage, but was purchased after marriage. And so if one person is named on the mortgage and you're not, don't think that that property is only owned by them, because although their name is on land registry, you have an interest if you are married to that family home as well. And if you need to protect yourself because you're worried that they might like increase the mortgage and take the money or sell the family home, put it on the market, you can put a notice on land registry so that house can't be sold. So just a bit of information while I'm answering this question. I had to flee one night after an incident of domestic violence with my children. However, I'm waiting on court date for non-mol and occupation order, so me and the children can return safely. Yeah, really good idea to make sure you are safe. I work part-time and I'm a full-time mum and cannot afford to rent privately. And housing have said there is a long waiting list. Ideally, I would like to keep the family home for my children. I made it into a home the last 10 years. I've maintained this home for them. Yeah, and I can sense your emotions when it comes to the family home, and I can really see that. What we do have to look at is where will the other person go? That is part of the settlement that you'll need to consider. There's no mortgage, so although you work part-time, it's likely you can transfer it. Potentially, there's not going to be huge legal costs for you to transfer it because there's no mortgage. But where is the other person going to go? What assets will they get to be able to house themselves? Because whatever happens, both of you need housing. And of course, children are priority. So keeping the house for the children, if you are mostly their full-time carer, then that is an important consideration. But what will happen with the other person? That is also part of this conversation. And obviously, I don't know enough to guide you on that. We're thinking about co-owning the house after the divorce for the children. Do you have any advice on how to actually make that work? If you're talking about something similar to a Mesha order, where you keep the house in joint names, one person is living there after the divorce, and the other person has other housing, it might be that there is a way for the other person to also have their own property. And what happens is when the youngest child is 18, you then either transfer it or sell it. That works well. It's put into a court order. So if anything happens, you can enforce it. And it depends what you're saying by co-owning the house. Is it that you are thinking of something called a nesting arrangement, which is where the children live in the house and the parents move in and out? So say, for example, you have a child arrangement that you have the children 1 week and the other person has the children 1 week, that you do the moving around, not the children. So you would move in for a week, look after the children, and then on the second week, the other parent comes in and looks after the children. Lots of people do that. You have to be careful about a nesting arrangement because for whatever reason, if you fell out, then that arrangement doesn't work and you're still co-owning the house. So it might be that in your financial order, you might have to put some contingency in place around that. I hope that answers your question. I love the idea of it, but I've seen too many issues where people have co-owned a house, even if it's a measure order, or if they're doing this nesting arrangement where people then later on aren't as amicable, things can get really difficult. Even where people live like 3 doors down, there can be issues around living so close to each other as well. So I hope that answers your question. Both my children are equally attached to my partner. Also, how custody will be decided. Younger one is 10. So that's a whole different conversation around children. But when we are looking at how arrangements work, we have to look at what's best for the children. They're equally attached to you and your partner. And it's important that where both of you want to be involved and it's safe for both of you to have good contact with the children, then it might be a 50-50 arrangement is the right thing. Courts really like that. But if you think 50-50 isn't best for the children, you need to come up with a plan that means that both of you have a good quality contact, good amount of contact, but it might be that they spend more time with one person than the other, so they've got more of a stable base. But I do a talk around children as well. So if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, you should be able to see that and you'll get a notification when we upload that video as well. So I hope that helps. Do you offer mediation services to keep the divorce journey amicable, including financial separation and child custody? So I don't do mediation anymore. But what I do is I work with couples from the starting point. So when they've both made that decision and they need to get some help to the end point. So I work with a couple all the way through, from guiding them to helping them get to an agreement to all the legal process as well. So I can definitely talk to you about that if you would like. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I know we've gone over. I hope you found it useful. I haven't had feedback, so I'm not quite sure if it's been useful, but I hope it has been. It's been lovely to spend this time with you this morning, and feel free to join me next week. I'm not sure what I'm talking about next week. We do have a timetable. Nelma, do you know what next week's talk is about? Fair financial settlement. That's perfect. So we put all the finance ones together so that it's almost like a journey through. So we did financial disclosure last week, I believe. This week is the family home. Next week is 5 steps to getting to that fair financial settlement. And I'm sure there'll be more finance talks as well. What are your hourly cost prices, please? I haven't started the divorce proceedings, but would like to get advice around my situation. So I charge £300 an hour, inclusive of VAT. So feel free to let me know. And usually I can do a one-off session where I can give you good sort of a whole overall guidance, give you some resources, templates, and really tell you where to start so you can take control of your own divorce, which is what this is all about. You becoming empowered, taking control, keeping your costs down, and just getting the guidance when you need it so that you are well informed of what you need to do. And potentially you won't need a lawyer to do everything for you. I hope that's been helpful. If you need to reach out, I think Nelma shared details, including email address. There you go. So feel free to email us and we'll be in touch and work out the best way to help you. Do take care. I'll leave the Zoom running for a bit so you can catch up with the links if you need them. See you soon. Bye bye.